Emperor Basil, after a string of successful campaigns between 1000 and 1004, decided to shift his focus towards Bulgaria itself. Despite Samuel's lingering ability to fight, he was no longer perceived as a significant threat to the Balkan themes of the empire. His once formidable raiding expeditions had dwindled to sporadic attacks, mainly targeting the city of Thessaloniki and its surroundings. While Samuel's forces managed to ambush and capture the region's governor, Ioannis Chaldas, this small victory was overshadowed by the overall setbacks and losses the Bulgarians had endured in the past 4 years. Samuel's governors, including some of his kinsmen, began contemplating the future trajectory of the conflict with Byzantium, and many saw little promise for the Bulgarian cause. Around 1005, a turning point occurred when Basil received a visit from Ashot Terranites, the Tsar's son-in-law. Ashot, previously captured by Samuel in 995 and subsequently imprisoned, had married Samuel's daughter, Miroslava. However, disillusioned with the Bulgarian cause, Ashot, along with the Patriarch of Dyrrhachium, John Chryselios, decided to surrender the coastal city to Basil. The city gates were opened without resistance, allowing Basil to peacefully occupy this significant Adriatic port. Sensing weakness, Basil prepared to intensify his efforts against Samuel of Bulgaria. Between 1005 and 1014, the conflict transitioned into a series of low-intensity raids and minor campaigns, with few major battles. Samuel persisted with raids near Thessaloniki, while Basil responded with swift punitive expeditions into the southern borders of Bulgaria. It's likely that Basil delegated aspects of the conflict to his Balkan governors, notably Nicephorus Xiphias, the Duke of Philippopolis, and Theophylact Botaniates, the newly titled Duke of Thessaloniki. Despite his domestic focus, Basil personally engaged in campaigns against the Bulgarians. In 1009, he achieved a minor victory at the Battle of Kreta. Following this clash, the conflict returned to its pattern of low-intensity warfare as Basil juggled various responsibilities within the empire. Located on the southernmost tip of the Italian peninsula, the last possessions of the Roman Empire in its ancient homeland had been subjected to Muslim piracy by the late 10th century. These sporadic raids became more frequent and devastating during the 990s, when Basil was preoccupied dealing with enemies on the major frontiers of the empire. Despite this, a mix of clever diplomacy and the arrival of fresh reinforcements in the early 1000s allowed the emperor to preserve his Italian provinces. The Byzantine governors, or catapans of Italy, managed to safeguard many of their cities from Muslim sacking by appealing to the rising Italian republics of Pisa and Venice. In one such instance, the very seat of the Byzantine catapan, the Apulian town of Bari, was saved from certain sacking after a squadron of Venetian galleys destroyed the Muslim fleet at the city's harbor.
Beginning in the early 1000s, the emperor began diverting more of his attention and manpower toward Italy. He increased the size of local garrisons and sent emissaries bringing lavish gifts to the court of the Kalbid Emirate of Sicily, Jafar al-Kalbi. As a result, the number of Muslim raids in Byzantine Italy gradually declined during the first decade of the 11th century. Despite this, Basil would soon be forced to deal with another great nuisance on the peninsula. In 1009, a Lombard nobleman from Bari and Melis managed to seize the town in an attempt to carve out a state of his own in Byzantine Apulia. Yet the Lombard baron's plans were laid to waste, as the emperor's newly appointed catapan, Basil Masardinites, began a siege of the city after eventually being forced out by the local Greeks in 1011. Melis was forced to seek refuge in Salerno, and so Bari fell back into Byzantine hands. With Italy stabilized, Emperor Basil began preparations for a final showdown with his old rival, Samuel of Bulgaria. In the early summer of 1014, Basil set out from Constantinople and marched toward Macedonia with an army close to around 30,000 men. In the beginning of his advance, however, the emperor was only accompanied by 10,000 men from the regular Togmata forces of Constantinople. During the march, the Byzantine ranks swelled when troops from the Balkan themes linked up with the emperor along the road to Macedonia. This included men under the leadership of the famed Duke of Philippopolis, Nicephorus Xiphias. He was to play an important role in the upcoming campaign. In the meantime, Theophylact and his several thousand strong garrison were ordered to remain in Thessalonica to guard the oft-targeted city against a potential Bulgarian counter-offensive. Samuel wasted little time making his own preparations for meeting Basil's army. Tsar and his son, Gavril Radomir, set out for the mountains of eastern Macedonia. There, they began blocking the mountain passes and valleys leading into Macedonia with wooden ramparts, or demas as they were known to the Bulgarians. Samuel made the sturdy fortress of Strumitsa his base of operation. This strategic fort was located in a narrow valley between the mountains of Belasica to the south and Ogrozden in the north. The Tsar and his men blocked a narrow area in the passage, close to the western edge of the valley, several miles away from a village called Kleidion. It was a route frequently utilized by the Bulgarian armies while on campaign. Furthermore, the Tsar's men had constructed ramparts, blocking any other passages that Basil could use to outflank Samuel, especially around the valley of the nearby Vardar River. Overall, Samuel's army numbered around 10,000 men, dispersed around the mountains to garrison the many wooden palisades. The long, tall rampart close to Kleidion was guarded by the largest number of men, probably around 2,000. The Tsar, his son, and the bulk of his army were likely concentrated around Strumitsa. Samuel's strategy was to wait for Basil to march his men down one of the blocked passages. This was done, the wall garrisons would be large enough to hold the Romans long enough for the Tsar to muster his men from the other palisades and quickly march to reinforce the besieged wall. Yet, there was one hitch to Samuel's plan: the Roman garrison at Thessalonica. Theophylact could choose to march his men at any moment using an alternative pass. Thus, if Samuel was to concentrate all of his forces around a single palisade, he would risk being flanked in the rear by Theophylact's forces. And so, the Tsar sent a contingent of cavalry led by General David Nestotoritzes to harass the Duke. Unfortunately for the Bulgarians, Theophylact had learned of the approaching horse contingent and successfully intercepted in the Third Battle of Thessalonica. The small Bulgarian force was annihilated together with its commander, David. Worse still for Samuel, after this victory, the Duke of Thessalonica and his several thousand strong army immediately marched for Bulgaria. Meanwhile, Basil and the main Byzantine army had already managed to march through Mosynopolis, Ceres, and the Rupel Pass, and were now heading towards the Kleidion rampart. Samuel had correctly predicted that the emperor would use this route, and so he had left his largest garrison division there. Yet upon receiving the news of David's defeat in the south, the Tsar and his son quickly realized that they, together with the bulk of their army, were effectively trapped in Strumitsa. The town of Kleidion was too far away from the passes that Theophylact could potentially march through with his men. If Samuel was to reinforce the defending garrison at Kleidion, he would do so at the risk